All right, so when we left off, I had finished this, and I had moved it in to make a raster file to upload to PhotoBucket and to print. But then I decided I wanted to change a few other things. There are some teeth I hadn't filled in, so I went ahead and filled those in. And instead of just the one layer of this kind of Dairy Queen-esque or KFC-esque background color, I decided to kind of triple it up, and give it a stroke, and give it a gradation. You know, so all of these things have improved it in my mind. I also played with a different variation where I took out the jaw entirely. Let's see, where is that? And put in my chicken leg. And it doesn't have such a mask theme, but that's kind of maybe a more, like, I don't know, strange logo. So I have that all built into my vector here. It's all ready to go. Now the question is, how do I save this and put it into Photoshop so that I can print it? Well, the first thing is you save first as an AI file, you know, to keep all of the Illustrator stuff. That's your working file format. And so it's saved that way. Then you're going to save it as an EPS file, which helps it transfer between different programs. So I save as, and it will still keep all your layers when you open it in Illustrator, but when you'll be able to open the EPS in Photoshop. So I'm going to save my EPS to the desktop. Command D is my shortcut to navigate it to the desktop. I'm going to keep the same name, Carl for I assignment 6. I'll call this Final Zombie Sanders, right? And I'm going to make it an EPS file, an Illustrator EPS. When I hit save, it will show me the defaults. I want the defaults. And just say OK. And now I can close it and go to my desktop, and I'll see an EPS there. If I open up the EPS in preview, it shows it to me as a vector. So the more I zoom in, it stays sharp no matter what. Right? So that is a vector file. The EPS is a vector. Even its gradation, it's still a vector. But now I'm in Photoshop. I open up Photoshop, and instead of opening my EPS with Photoshop, which will then ask me this before I can do anything, it forces me to rasterize it, and I don't want it to do that, especially because I don't want it in CMYK mode, though I could change that. Because a vector can make any raster size you want, but I'd rather see it before I have to make those decisions, and I don't want to lock it into one proportion. So I say cancel, and instead of opening it that way in Photoshop, I instead create the paper for it in Photoshop. So I say File, New, and because we are filling an 8x10 matte window with this, in my new file, I want it to be 8 inches wide, in inches, not pixels, 10 inches tall, and 350 pixels per inch, because that's our lab standard resolution. And I'll call this Carl Color Logo Mashup. And this is now going to be print ready. So PR, Carl Color Logo Mashup. I say OK. And it just gives me a white 8x10 by 350 pixels per inch piece of paper. Right? Now, just like we did when we composited our landscape, our creatures, we're going to bring our reference, our EPS file, and drag it onto my paper. And then you'll notice it has this transforming box on it, and I have to place it. This 8x10 window is exactly what it is for the matte. So I'm going to make it look as good as I can within this. Maybe give it a little bit of white space around. If I hold down Shift and Option, I can shrink it towards the middle. And then maybe use the arrows and give it a little bit more space on the bottom than the top. I hit Return and it's placed. But notice that it's still a smart object. So if I try to edit it within Photoshop, it won't let me. Because it will make me rasterize it first. But by not rasterizing it, by leaving it as a smart object, it will always refer to that EPS. And so even though it's a raster image here, if I wanted to make this image size much, much bigger, like 650 pixels per inch, but I'd have to say resample, right? So it's 8 by 10 at 650. If this was a rastered image, that increasing all the pixels would make it a lot softer. But because it's a smart image, a smart vector, it will raster up perfectly to whatever resolution I want to choose. So that's why we bring them in as smart objects. Okay, there's some other things we can play with as well that I really like. So say you think this looks good. I do not want to rasterize it. How do I get out of that? Go to something else. All right. So notice it's a smart object, right? Even as a smart object, though, we can apply some layer styles to it if we want. So if I wanted to give this logo a little bit more presence on the paper, I can just double-click that layer. In the blue part. I don't know why it keeps doing that. There we go. And I can get layer styles. So if I want to, I can give this object a stroke around it if I want. You know, an extra black line or whatever color line I want with whatever opacity I want. I could give it an inner shadow. This is how you get all those fancy icon effects for apps and things. I can give it a satin gloss, a color overlay. So I can fine-tune it even as a vector within Photoshop. You know, bring a little bit more red into it, or maybe give it kind of a creepier color, like a pale green. Ooh. Make it multiply mode. See the difference that makes? Kind of turns all my whites to a greenish. Or I can give it, which probably is most common, is a drop shadow. And you can play with the distance of the drop shadow, the spread of it, the size of it, and of course the angle of it, right? To give it a little bit more presence as well. So all of these are options you have just when you're in Photoshop, but they still keep it as a vector, which is pretty nice. And I can even color my drop shadow. So if I want it to be like slightly pale blue, or that kind of creepy green, a little bit more gray in it. There we go. To set it off, maybe that's good. Play with the size a little bit more. There we go. So you can see that those effects, like that drop shadow, is just here, and it can be turned on and off on that layer, but it is not making it a raster file. It is still a vector file, a smart object that I can modify as I like. Then I save this as a Photoshop file. So PR, color, logo, mashup, Photoshop, or as a TIFF file, which I actually prefer for my print ready because TIFF saves space without losing any quality. It's an LZW compression. That's what saves the space always with a TIFF. So I save that. It's on my desktop. That's ready to print. But then I also want to save it as a JPEG to upload to PhotoBucket. Okay. So what is the difference between your JPEG and your EPS? We'll open them both up in preview. And you'll see my JPEG has these Photoshop effects. But as I zoom in, you're going to start to see the pixels, right? Because JPEGs are raster files. Whereas my vector, as I zoom in, everything will stay perfectly sharp. So looking at those teeth. And that's why we did them as a vector. So this gives us the ultimate flexibility. And with future projects, we'll do a lot more working between vectors and raster files, kind of combining the two. All right, now I have to do the same thing for my black and white. So I go back to Illustrator. And I'm going to open up. Well, I can just open up the one I had open, because I can always take color out. So open recent files, assignment 6. And now I'm just going to turn off the color layers. Let's see, where did I color this jaw? There we go. Oh, I got a little thing there. Turn that off. Oh, but I like those, so I'm going to convert those. These are some extra kind of cutouts I added, so I want to cut those out of my original. So remember, how do I do that? I have to unlock them, select them all. Also select by holding down Command what it's overlapping, and then I use the Pathfinder tool. Pathfinder, there you are. And I'm going to exclude them. And then just make it all black fill. Oh, there's an object in there I don't want. Ah, it's this. Got it. So first, this is a little confusing. First, I'm going to merge this, with the Pathfinder, so they don't overlap. Illustrator. Very legalistic. So I merge those two first. Then I can select these with the overall, and then Pathfind to exclude, and then it will give me the shape I want. All right, so now I have my black and white image. It's cut out. I'm going to save it as an Illustrator file. There's that overlap too. So how do I fix that? So you think black and white's easy, but there's still all these concerns. I have to add these two together, and then just use Pathfinder to merge them, and then I can exclude. I don't see anything now that's not there. So I connect that with all of these, and then exclude, and then turn it back to a black fill. That's why you learn so much working with Illustrator, making all these little adjustments. Okay, so now I can say File, Save As, Black and White, Zombie Sanders EPS to the desktop. I can close it, and I can see I have a black and white EPS now, which is infinitely scalable. And now I want to bring that black and white EPS onto my 8x10 Photoshop file. Just click, drag, and drop. And then I can place, and if I want to make it a little bit bigger, because I'm not going to have the red around it, I can. And then if I want to apply layer effects, I can. Just by double clicking, and I can give it a drop shadow. I can give it